Thanks very much for that welcome, and Gord, thank you, and to the other organizers for the invitation, and also for your participation on our panel. So I'm going to talk fairly briefly about this panel and the work we're doing, and then use some specific examples from cities to show how we can build truly sustainable communities that are green from a triple bottom line perspective, that respect environmental values, that respect economic values, and also respect the important social values that we as Canadians hold of inclusivity and equality. First of all, just a tiny bit about the panel. The Council of Canadian Academies has been tasked by the federal government to do an independent, science-based exploration of what ICT technologies are best to green the Canadian economy. That's the question we've been charged with. Our report goes to the federal government. It's out for peer review at the moment. Subject to the peer review, it'll be released later this fall. One of the rules with the Council for Canadian Academies reports is that until the federal government has had an opportunity to see the report, you actually can't talk about the details of the report. So I'm in a very awkward position today of being up here as chair of an expert panel on an issue, and I can't tell you what the expert panel thinks. However, I can certainly tell you what I think. And some of what I think is based on the work that we've done and the research that we've done. And I'm very excited about this report because I think it has the potential to help shape a national dialogue about what we need to do to green the Canadian economy. And so from my perspective, it's a triple bottom line perspective. And one of the places that we can act today, using new technologies, using existing technologies to address our environmental, social, and economic challenges is in our cities. And an important part of our environmental challenge is responding to climate change. This is a photograph from a storm that happened in Toronto in 2009. Happened to be during the G20, which was a storm of a little bit of a different kind for those of you who are from Toronto. And these storms, we used to say, are the kinds of storms that will happen with the changing climate. Well, the storm that happened in Alberta this summer, the storm that happened in Toronto this summer, Hurricane Sandy, all of those storms, I think it's fair to say now, this is the changing climate. So it's essential as we think about how we're going to green our economy, that part of that discussion is about technologies and other strategies that help us address climate change. And the good news is, with respect to cities, first of all, there's a study from the C40 group of cities that says that about 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions can be attributed to activities in cities or activities that support them, like the generation of power. And that's good news because we know where those emissions come from. They come from buildings, from transportation, and how we generate our energy. So if we get those three things right, we can make huge steps to mitigate and to adapt to the changing climate. So that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today in the context of this report and the opportunity to use ICT to address those issues. So, buildings. Accenture worked with the City of Chicago using very advanced analytics to determine what neighborhoods in Chicago were the ones where buildings were the least well insulated. And it's an important question because Chicago had a program, they had incentives to try to get people to insulate their buildings and their houses, and that program wouldn't work unless it was really well targeted. And Accenture, I think it's the leading report of its kind because what it did was use all of the data available from the electric company and the gas company. And in some places that's very difficult because that data is private, which is a real fundamental practical issue in some of this work. Interestingly, in Chicago, of course, the mayor can just phone up the electric company and say, please give Accenture your data, you'll do that tomorrow, and they do it. It's a little bit of a different political system than we have. So very, very important. Second aspect of this is engaging people and engaging the bright technical minds we have in our cities. And Toronto is one of the leading cities in making its data open. So you see, for example, the Toronto Transit Commission has done a couple of great apps to help you tell when the next streetcar is going to come, when the next bus is going to come, but they also made the data public. And really smart young people have made their own apps that are available on your smartphone that are terrific. And all of this came about with a philosophy that the IT revolution is helping us democratize decision-making in a way, and that we really should reach out and engage our smart people. I keep calling them young, but they usually are, certainly younger than me. So I mentioned transportation, extremely important, and important for a number of reasons. This is the City of Toronto's transit plan as of 2007 and 2 weeks ago. The plan is different today, but I'm very confident that in another 2 weeks they'll go back to this plan. For those of you from Toronto, just an aside, the dotted line that goes from the grey line up to Shepherd East, that's the focus of the current debate. And to change that from light rail to subway is about the same cost as to build the entire Etobicoke Finch West line. But that's not why the slide's here. The slide's here because of the importance. If we want to green a city, we need to green it around a framework. And part of that framework has to be electrified transportation. And you need a network that reaches every part of the city if you're going to enable, first of all, the city as it grows and develops, to build in a way that is walkable, livable, bikeable, and transit-oriented as opposed to car-oriented. And you also need it to be electric for the reasons both previous speakers said. A very important step, and the fact that this is a network is critical. That's why building one line of a couple of stops is nice if it's a subway, but it doesn't make the change we need. And this is true in all major cities of the world. The technology in IT in the new vehicles that we're acquiring matters tremendously as well. This is one of the new streetcars. And the new Toronto Rocket subway is fascinating because the IT in the Rocket subway, when the signal system is changed, will allow the subway trains to run much closer together, effectively doubling the capacity of the Yonge University subway line simply through advanced IT. And the only other way to double the capacity would be to build another tunnel. And as you know, that's prohibitively expensive. So very, very important example of how IT works. Second point, in the big picture, buildings, transportation, third point, very important to get our electricity right. And there is an opportunity through initiatives like the province's feed-in tariff, what they've done in Germany, and what the City of Toronto has done, which I'm going to explain here, to actually green our grid. And I think it's the most important technical advance of building a smart grid enabled, using the ideas from the so-called Internet of Things to connect devices, and most importantly, to connect green sources of power distributed around the city. That matters from the perspective of greening the electricity grid, also matters from the transportation perspective. Because as electric cars become more common and as our public transportation system moves to be far more electricity-based than diesel-based, if we have green sources of power, we can quite effectively green our economy, support the growth of cities, and dramatically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. The City of Toronto's plan is called the Power to Live Green, was done in partnership with Toronto Hydro, and it shows exactly how to change our grid using green sources of power. And we did a pilot to show it can be done. It's the wind turbine at Exhibition Place. Exhibition Place today is more or less a net zero consumer of electricity. As much electricity is produced there using green sources of power like the wind turbine and the largest urban solar installation in Canada as is consumed. And if you can do it at Exhibition Place, you can do it all over this city and all over cities in Canada. But the key is changing our grid and renewing it so it is a smart grid, and I think that's one of the most important conclusions. That's the strategy. Back to buildings, and I'm going to do this from the perspective of the third leg of the triple bottom line, because it matters very much. We know how to do a lot to green our cities, and there's much more than I can say in 15 minutes. But we know how to do a lot to green our buildings. This is New York's plan, where they simply post on the walls of commercial buildings what their energy consumption is, and it's resulted in quite a dramatic change in the commercial market. People are now saying, I don't want to go to that building, energy consumption's too high, and there's a lot of private work on retrofits. We know how to do that. We know how to build transportation that's green. It'd be nice if we built it a bit faster in Toronto's case, but we know how to do it. We know how to support growth into cities through things like an excellent transportation network based on LRTs that supports development and growth and jobs. One of our big challenges, though, is how do we use this green revolution and this IT revolution to meet the third leg of the triple bottom line? Yeah, how do we ensure our society is socially sustainable as well as environmentally and economically? And there's a little example in Toronto's case that I think shows it very well. And although this isn't IT-based, it's the kind of example that can be used as we think about how we use IT to green our economy. And it's Toronto's Tower Renewal Project. Simply put, that's an environmental strategy designed to reduce greenhouse gases that was first thought of by engineers at the University of Toronto, then some architects picked it up. The engineers looked at these concrete slab apartment buildings, which are huge wasters of energy. It takes more energy to heat and cool a one-bedroom apartment in these buildings than it does a small house. So huge wasters of energy. The engineers determined that if you put insulation on the outside, it's very inexpensive, and you have dramatic energy use reductions and dramatic greenhouse gas reductions. In Toronto's case, there's about 1,000 buildings. If they were all insulated, we would reduce Toronto's greenhouse gas emissions by 5% from that one project. And the first Kyoto target is 6%. So when people look at the storms that are happening and say, you know what, we can't do anything, there's nothing we can do, it's just not true. We can actually make dramatic steps, and this project is one of the very key projects to do that. When it came to the city, we said, that's fantastic, what a brilliant environmental strategy, but we also recognized that a lot of these apartment buildings are in low-income neighborhoods. And what do people need in low-income neighborhoods? Higher incomes. So, well, they need many things, but that's one of the things. So we worked with the construction trade unions in Toronto to start finding ways to train people who lived in the very communities where we were coming in with this environmental idea to help them get the good, well-paid union jobs that are going to result if we insulate 1,000 apartment buildings in Toronto in a project all at once. The project is still in the pilot stage, but a key component of it is engaging the very people who live in the buildings. And that matters because as we move forward with this IT revolution, as we use the broad reach that two speakers ago showed for IT to help green our cities, we do have to ensure that people who live in neighborhoods that need support get a real chance. And in Toronto's case, this project showed us the way. And for those of you from Toronto, you'll know we have priority neighborhoods. Those are neighborhoods where traditionally there hasn't been much government investment in public goods like libraries, community centers, job training, youth engagement. And if you look at this chart, these circles are where the largest concentration of those apartment buildings that can be renewed are. And those circles are almost entirely, but not quite, the same places where the city has prioritized for investment. And they also happen to be connected directly to where the new transit lines are in the city's transit plan, which I call Transit City and has been renamed. And that's critically important because the goal of this transit strategy had a transportation goal, it has a development goal, it supports the official plan goals of building inside the city, which is our antidote to sprawl. It has a local emissions goal to get people out of cars and onto transit, but it also has a social goal. And that social goal is to ensure that people in every neighborhood in this city are part of the active social life of Toronto. So as the Council of Canadian Academies report comes forward, one of the things I hope to see is some thought about how we build that kind of triple bottom line Canada, how we use the IT revolution to lower our greenhouse gas emissions, to reach other environmental values, to create jobs, and ensure that those jobs are shared by everybody. That's the kind of Canada that I want to live in, and I know that's the kind of Toronto we all want to live in. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you.